comes to money, why do we do what we do? Hello there, Tyra.
Hi.
Turns out our emotions, how we grew up, and our own life story all factor into how we invest.
So how can we acknowledge that while spending smartly? Well, today in Dollars and Cents, Kelly Koopmans spoke with financial expert Adam Powell for answers.
All right, Adam, when we talk about the stock market, seems like the whole point is you want to buy low, you want to sell high. That's not what is always happening here.
It rarely happens that way, yes.
So why is that, and what is this behavioral finance?
You know, it's a really interesting phenomenon that we humans do, and we do it all the time. And I'm not alone, you're not alone when this happens. Even your stockbroker is probably not alone when they do it as well, right? So this behavioral finance says that, boy, when we see something that a stock that we own is losing or going down, we want to sell it. We're like, get out, because no one wants to tell that story around the dinner table. Like, oh yeah, I have such and such stock and it's gone down 15% and I'm holding on to it. Well, that's actually the time, many times you actually want to hold on to it is when it's low. And we do the same thing too. We see a stock going up and climbing, we're like, oh great, I'm going to sell it. And we sell at the wrong time. Or the opposite of behavioral finance is we see a stock going up and we're like, I want to get in. And we end up buying high. And so those things are really tricky to do. So we have to get out of the emotional of buying stocks and ask ourselves and remind ourselves, why am I doing this?
And it's so hard to do, to take the emotional part out of it, especially when you're talking about money. I mean, you're talking about people's livelihoods here.
Exactly right.
You talk about these different biases that we have. What are those and how do they factor into behavioral finance?
Yeah, well, one, for example, is that we have this bias of thinking, I love this example, is that 80% of us think that we are better drivers than the average driver. Now, that is statistically impossible.
Right.
We're not. But we fall into these traps of
Except for you and me, right?
Exactly right, yeah. I'm definitely a better, yeah, right? I just drove in as well. But no, we fall into these traps. We also think that we're better at buying stocks than the average person as well. And the reality is, we are not. Many years ago, I think it was USA Today that mentioned that 85% of stockbrokers don't do as well as the S&P 500 does. Which is to say, if you simply were to put your money into an S&P 500 index, 85% of the time you would have done better than your stockbroker. What? Right? Again, this behavioral thing about trying to guess the market and time it, we're terrible at it. We just simply are. But if we simply buy a stock and do some homework, and buy it for the long haul, then we're going to do much, much better than trying to buy and sell when it's going up and down. We really need to take a pause, ask ourselves why we're doing this. And if it's for a financial gain and you want those gains, sure, go ahead. But if you're trying to get gain on a rising stock, it's probably reached its peak. You just need to wait and wait for a correction.
We're humans, though.
Totally.
That's our problem,
Yeah,
is that
really
it's hard to shut all that down. So do you have any advice on shutting that down and any other advice for people approaching this in the new year? Yeah,
well, number one, if you are looking to invest a lot of money, right, get a financial planner, right? Get with somebody that can at least help you be a second voice. Maybe you don't have to follow their advice, but just get a soundboard to say, okay, that does make sense, or oh, I'm glad I didn't do that for these reasons. I already mentioned earlier that when you go to want to buy or sell something, is take a pause, take a breath. Wait, what am I doing this for? Am I doing the same thing I did yesterday, last week, last month, last year? I'm buying high, I'm selling low. And so those, I think if you take those two steps right there, you'll have a much better opportunity to be a winner in the stock market.
I would imagine that behavioral finance is something that's just fascinating to you personally. Talk to me about what makes it so interesting.
Well, I love it. There's a great book out there called The Psychology of Money, and it talks about how we make decisions and why we make financial decisions. And probably think about yourself. How were you raised? How did the ones that raised you, your mom, your dad, your grandma and grandpa, talk about money? Or what were they raised during the Depression, right, era? And so all of those factors play into how we think and deal with money and how we make decisions. There are many people that don't trust banks, right? Or but yet they lose out on the interest that they could gain. Or how we even think about Christmas, the New Year, or how we gift. It all plays into our psychology. And so we can just think about why we're doing something and stop repeating the past. And what that takes is really talking to somebody about it. It really takes about taking a true pause, maybe writing down why we're doing it. acknowledging it, right? I know it kind of sounds like trying to break a bad habit.
Or a therapist.
But you know what? It's exactly what we're trying to do. We are trying to break a bad habit. And so by just knowing why you're doing it, realizing the steps you're taking, if you're doing the exact same thing, you're going to have the same outcome.
Yeah. So it's another thing we can blame our parents for.
Yeah.
Mom and Dad, if you're watching, I don't mean you.
But it's really fun to just think about, okay, you know, money makes us do interesting things.
Yeah.
It's the same thing about, you know, we talk about money with mom and dad that say, hey, when I pass away, we're going to do X, Y, Z for you. And you're like, oh yeah, great, that's awesome. But when somebody passes away, something changes. Money makes us do odd things. It makes us, well, think about relationships. A lot of them are successful because of money, but most of them are actually damaged because of money. And so we want to be careful about how we think about the stock market, investing, our loved ones, because it's just the natural human instinct when it comes around money. It generally has a negative or a poor outcome.
Right. All right. All very important things to think about.
They are.
Adam, thank you.
Thank you.
Money makes us do odd things.
That's interesting, right?
It is. And I think it's spot on, too, just because I think most of us want to make more of it and are trying to figure out ways to make more of it in a very short amount of time. And, you know, maybe we're not as knowledgeable about investing or the stock market and how complicated it is, and trying to work it to our advantage, you know, when the economy is going up or going down. It's a lot to take in and figure out.
I was just going to say that was a little bit of an information overload for
Yeah, a
me,
little
because
bit.
one thing at a time, like we talked about so much in that segment, all helpful and valuable information, but you're right, we all want to make more money, but we're trying to figure out what to do with it next.
Yeah.
How do we invest it? Are we purchasing stocks?
Yeah.
Do you follow the stock market?
Oh, well, I do every day in
do
my
it on
job,
the
just
morning
based on the numbers, because we do a little stock market check every morning. But
Yeah.
it's sort of interesting to see how it flows, and then trying to make sense of it. And I'm thinking back to, you know, maybe some of the behaviors that we carry on from our parents, and do we carry those behaviors on? Do we change some of them when it comes to money? And, you know, I don't know. It's just, money's complicated.
Well, my mom likes to shop, so now I see where I get it from. I totally see what Adam Powell was talking about.
My mom likes to shop too. I think that's where I get it from too. Thanks, Mom.